All right, everyone's done their vocal warm-ups. All right, that's mine too. Welcome everybody on Facebook Live today. I am joined by three experts in the progressive field right now. I'm State Representative Jonathan Singer, representing Niwot, Longmont, Lyons, and Allens Park. And I'm joined by several folks here from the labor movement, the women's health movement, and our civil liberties movement. And what I'm going to do is let folks tell you a little bit about who they are and the organizations that they represent. And then we're really going to get down into it and talk about what is happening at the U.S. Senate right now and what we can do in Colorado to address the Supreme Court hearings, the allegations that we've been hearing, and where we're going to go from here. So I'm going to start from my left, since I'm a Democrat. And
I guess that means I'm first.
And so Denise, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about what the ACLU in Colorado is doing and what you're keeping an eye on in terms of the Kavanaugh appointment.
You bet. Denise Mayes, and I'm the Public Policy Director for the ACLU of Colorado. One of the things that we do, of course, as Representative Singer mentioned, is we do defend civil liberties. We take our fight for civil liberties to the courts. We take them to the state legislature, to city councils across the state, and in the streets. We are mindful of the conservative turn that the Supreme Court is taking and may now even go a little bit further. What our plan is here at the ACLU, to the extent possible, is to create a civil liberties safe zone in the state of Colorado. So what we can't win in the federal courts and what we can't get from the federal government, we hope to get that from our state government and from our state courts, because I think that we're going to have some serious problems in the federal court system going forward when it comes to advancing civil liberties and civil rights.
All right. So we've got at least two people watching right now, so thank you for watching our audience. I know a lot of people have very busy lives, and so what we wanted to do is make sure we put this up, and what we're going to do is we're going to keep this video up after we're done taping today at 1 p.m. And feel free to comment in the questions. I see one person has already said thank you, another person has said hello. So hi back, and if you can't hear us, please, and you're welcome, and please let us know if and when you have questions. I'll be monitoring that for our presenters here. So next up, Jenna, why don't you tell us a little bit about what NARAL's up to and what we can look forward to.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rep. Singer, for having us today. My name is Jenna Olzels. I am the Political Director at NARAL Pro-Choice Colorado, which is a state affiliate of NARAL Pro-Choice America. We are a pro-choice political organization, so we represent the reproductive rights arm of the reproductive health rights and justice movements. We kind of sit in between our partners in the reproductive healthcare space, who are really out there providing services and advocating for their ability to provide services to patients, and our reproductive justice partners, who are out there advocating for women of color and issues that impact and intersect with reproductive rights issues for those communities. So NARAL sits kind of in the middle of those two different lines, and we really center the individual's access to care, regardless of where you're seeking that care. So NARAL works a lot in politically in our state legislature, and then of course, obviously, around things like Supreme Court nominations, which we've been seeing a lot of, unfortunately, in the last couple of years, right? So obviously, we are incredibly concerned about what is at stake for women's rights. I think Judge Kavanaugh has a history of treating women differently than he treats others. I think we have seen, and obviously our friend Robert's going to talk a little bit about some of the hiring practices and what's at stake for workers' rights. And I think that women are incredibly extra impacted by that, and in a lot of additional danger because of a lot of the positions that he has taken. Additionally, of course, everyone is very, very worried about Roe and the right to choose and the legal right to choose to have an abortion safe legally and in an accessible manner. We are very nervous. President Trump promised that he would only appoint nominees who would overturn Roe. And Kavanaugh essentially continues to fall back on a lot of dog whistle language around this issue, where he will say things like, well, Roe is settled law. But, I mean, I don't know about you, Jonathan, but doesn't the Supreme Court help kind of define laws? So to say that, well, Roe is settled law is a little bit of a cop-out, because Roe is challenged constantly in the local courts and in the district courts, and it is really just a matter of time that the standard could be brought up again to the Supreme Court. So we're incredibly nervous about this, and whether or not Roe is overturned, we believe that it will essentially be gutted nearly entirely, and we will see additional barriers come up to access to healthcare across the country, and we're incredibly concerned about this. Obviously, the elephant in the room is what will be happening tomorrow with Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, who is prepped to actually come in and testify in front of this committee. And there's a whole other thing right now about an attorney who was appointed, who I think Mitch McConnell referred to as a special assistant, who will be helping them ask some questions, which if that's not an indicator of how they feel about women's role in this, I don't know what would be. But so Dr. Ford is going to be testifying tomorrow about her experiences when she was a young woman and about the experiences that she had with Judge Kavanaugh. We fully believe that Kavanaugh needs to step down and he needs to step out of this process. We have now seen 3 women come forward, and where there is one, we said this last week, where there is one, there are 2, where there are 2, there are many, and there are already 3. And we believe all of these women, and that we believe that he should step down, and we will be watching Dr. Blasey Ford tomorrow do something very, very brave. So we're very nervous about reproductive rights, of course, and the treatment of women has been incredibly difficult to watch, and we will be watching tomorrow and supporting Dr. Ford.
Well, I want to get into that actually a little bit more after Robert introduces himself. And so why don't you, I assume it's okay to use first names here, as long as they're the correct first names. I promise I won't call anyone a special assistant. So why don't you tell us a little bit what Colorado AFL is working on right now?
Yeah, so my name is Robert Lindgren. I'm the Political and Organizing Director at the Colorado AFL. And for folks that aren't familiar with the Colorado AFL-CIO, at the most basic level, we fight for all Coloradans to have a voice on the job, to have respect, and to have safety in their workplace. So the recent allegations against Brett Kavanaugh are incredibly concerning. They're serious and they need to be investigated through proper channels. Allegations of discrimination in hiring practices are, of course, of a primary concern of us. As we know, the workplace should be a place where people have that respect, have that voice, and can have they should be able to feel safe and actually be safe. And because we do represent a lot of working people in our state prisons, on our power lines, in the trenches all over this state that are working very dangerous jobs. Brett Kavanaugh's background of being very much against safety in the workplace is of utmost concern. We've thoroughly reviewed Judge Kavanaugh's record, and there's no way that this would be anything but a very bad thing for all working people in Colorado and across the nation.
Well, on that note, I'm gonna jump back to Jenna real quick. I think that the elephant in the room right now are the allegations and how they came up, and there's so many different ways to look at this. But I actually want to start out with a slightly different question. We've talked about what this means in terms of a Supreme Court appointment, but in terms of the folks, the survivors that have come forward, how should we, not just as lawmakers, but as the average citizens, be approaching this? What can we do to support people in coming forward? And at an individual level, maybe going to sort of the broader policy level, what's going to create that environment that ensures that the truth actually comes out, not just for this case, which is a lifetime appointment to the highest court in the land, but any workplace?
So that's a really great question, Rep. Singer, and I think I was actually just having a conversation about this within the last couple of days, where I feel like in this circumstance and in all circumstances where we're talking about issues of sexual harassment or sexual assault or anything like that, a lot of the times people like to say that, well, this is a matter of a he said, she said. And now I have my own problems with that. I have my own problems with that. But let's just say that that is really what the situation is that we have a matter of a he said, she said. I think the first thing that I would offer to folks is to, if you are approaching it with that type of a mentality, actually stay true to it. I talk to a lot of people who say things like, well, I saw this one article that said this thing about Dr. Ford, or this other thing that said that. What did Dr. Ford say? And I think that we have moved past the idea of actually hearing from her. And what Robert was saying about having this investigated and having this looked into is incredibly important, because her words and her experiences here are incredibly valuable. And so I think that valuing the voices of these women rather than what the people around them are saying, I mean, I think it's a pretty scary indication that after this accusation came out, all of a sudden there was this list of 60 women who had new married names and were geographically diverse and all over the country and had all these different experiences. There was a pre-made ready list ready to go and say, well, I think Kavanaugh's a great guy. And you know what? Those women are perfectly within their right to say that if that's what they want to do. But I'll be perfectly honest, if they weren't there, it's not relevant. I want to hear from the people that were there. I want to hear from Dr. Ford. I want to hear from Brett Kavanaugh. I want to hear from Mark Judge. I only want to hear from the people that are there. And I think something to remember in order to be allies and advocates for survivors is to remember that we need to be centering their voices and not the noise that surrounds what is essentially becoming, how do I say this in an appropriate way? A giant just mess. It's just a mess. I'll go with mess. A storm, to say it in the shortened version, a storm. But I think to really center their voices and to not disregard them and to really hear for it. And I think that's why we are anxious to see Dr. Ford testifying tomorrow, and we are looking forward to, and not looking forward to, but we are anxious to hear about the additional stories and to hear from the rest of these women. And these women deserve to be heard from the rest of the country, and that's what we need to be advocating for, is to make sure that they are actually heard.
And that was just, if you don't mind, Representative Singer, I was just going to kind of as a segue to that, it seems like if there is nothing about our judicial branch that is more important, it is one with integrity. And it seems to me that in this particular instance, if anyone should be calling for an FBI investigation that is thorough and fair and unbiased, frankly, it should be Judge Kavanaugh, because I think I think it's just terrible on all levels, professionally and personally, that he would take the oath of office and be sitting on the highest court of the land with this sort of dark cloud, in a sense, following him. I think he's. It would be an indication of good character in my mind if he were the one asking for this thorough investigation.
I hadn't thought of it that way.
If he released his records as well, right?
Yeah. Well, he has calendar and calendars. So.
Yeah, just looking at it, like, working people expect the Supreme Court to be the most fair, the most independent branch of government, and right now it is not. It's definitely in the pockets of corporations. More and more the decisions that we see coming out are directly anti what working people need in this country, and that's why we have to, this just pushes it even further towards that. And that's what I'm saying. You think about just the average person working day in and day out. They just want to have that place with integrity that is that one that checks on all of the other branches. And with Kavanaugh's history of supporting executive power without limits, I think that that's really concerning. It really is. It's a great point.
So, last follow-up question on this one, then we'll see where the conversation goes today. In terms of the questions that you would want to see asked, and really this is for any of you, and if you want to remind the viewers who you are and the organizations that you represent, as people are jumping in, they may just think that you're just a really smart person but don't know what great organization you represent. Tell us some of the questions that you hope that are heard or that are mentioned, and also sort of a rewind back to the Clarence Thomas hearing. What do you hope not to see, learning from our mistakes from 20 years ago?
So I'll start with the Anita Hill question of this, and I will say probably one of the biggest things that will be a difference between the Anita Hill hearings and what we're going to see now is that 20 years ago, there were no women on the Judiciary Committee. There were absolutely none. And Anita Hill faced a panel of white men asking her questions and wanting her to go into very graphic, and I mean, it was necessary. We needed to hear, the American people needed to hear this. But she had to go into that room by herself to an entirely white male panel and to explain to them what had happened to her and what was going on. And a lot of that time that she was really disregarded, there were members of both parties who were disregarding her and who were really undercutting her and dismissing a lot of what she was saying. And I think that one of the biggest differences is that we're going to see is that there are many more women on the Judiciary Committee. One more would have been many more. But there are now actually women there, and the Democrats who are on this committee have actually been very good about standing with women so far, as this has gone, and they have believed Dr. Ford, and they have actually made those statements. So I think that while I do not envy what Dr. Ford is about to go into, I do think that there has been a shift from Anita Hill. But that being said, not enough of one, because I think that we're still going to see a lot of dismissiveness. I think that the special assistant, who is an accomplished attorney, who will be asking a lot of these questions and who will be representing them, they've hired a woman. And I think that we know exactly why they did that. It's so that they're not an all-white male panel asking her these questions, and that they can say, no, we had a woman asking these questions. So I think it'll be kind of interesting to see how they're framed and how she is treated, and if she is truly allowed to speak up. And I forgot the other half of your question, but I've been talking enough, so if you need to pop in.
And actually this will dovetail. What questions from this perspective would you like to see asked of Judge Kavanaugh? And then for our other two friends here, same thing. From civil liberties and labor movement, what questions need to be asked if the American people are going to actually get a fair hearing here and learn who Judge Kavanaugh really is? So we'll start with you, Jenna, and then jump back and forth.
No, that's great. And so I'll say my kind of cheeky response to that is to first say that, frankly, Brett Kavanaugh outlined some very, very rough questions back in the 1990s around President Clinton being questioned around these types of incidences. And frankly, Judge Kavanaugh's memo at the time indicated that he believed that there should be absolutely no breaks, that there should be, and that we should be absolutely relentless, and anything other than a relentless questioning would be abhorrent to him. And here's the thing that you will only hear me say one time ever, but Brett Kavanaugh was right on that memo. He was actually right. We need to be asking a lot of questions and very difficult, tough questions, because if we're not, it is absolutely abhorrent, and it is disregard for justice. But the non-catty response to that would definitely be that I think that we have seen, especially with the continued stories that we're seeing from the additional accusers, there was really a culture, it seems, of assault and of I want to call it showmanship a little bit, of male showmanship amongst some of these high school boys. I think we're seeing, and Brett Kavanaugh's high school yearbook quote, if anybody has seen that. He's part of a group that they have named this one particular woman, and that they've all were involved with her or something like that. It's all very scary, but I would like to see a lot of questions asked about what he finds culturally appropriate in work situations and personal situations. I'd also be very interested to know if he'd ever send his daughter to one of those parties that he went to in high school. That'd be a really interesting question to know. But I think as far as the sexual assault stuff goes, I think that everybody deserves to be heard and to have a chance to actually speak for themselves. But to Denise's earlier point, he is the one that has been hiding a lot of this information, and right now it is Dr. Ford and these other women who are coming forward with their information, and I just want them to be heard first and foremost. So
I think in the area, for example, of civil liberties in general, frankly, I think the committee did a very good job on their questions. What we didn't see were very good answers. So I think more importantly, tomorrow would be good to have real, substantive, concrete answers as opposed to, dodging and pivoting and refusing to answer. So I think that is something for all of us to watch and listen to pretty closely tomorrow.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah,
And then
and remind us who you're with today. So
That's again
for our
Robert
viewers.
with the Colorado AFL-CIO. We are an affiliated, a group of the various unions in Colorado that fight for people to have a voice on the job. And so really how I see this and how it relates to the values of unionism is, in a lot of ways, we are trying to build organizations that allow people to have a voice on the job on an equal playing field. And I think you see Dr. Ford working to try to make sure that these hearings, her and her lawyers, to make sure these hearings are on at least somewhat of an even playing field. And then once that happens, we would like to hear, again, really clear answers to these serious allegations, because we've got working people who need to know that if he gets pushed through, even with a disastrous record on working rights, even with a disastrous record of taking away rights on the job, and making sure that corporations have even more of a stronghold in this country, we want to make sure that he answers all of that in a meaningful way. And I really just feel that that it's going to be really a difficult hearing, but if we don't have that honest conversation, then I don't think people will I don't think the working people of Colorado will really understand that we saw these be aired in public, we can all make our decisions, and then still they choose to move forward with a flawed candidate for numerous reasons, not the least of which is the actual decisions he's made over the past decades.
And interestingly, we will hear from Dr. Ford tomorrow, but there are two other allegations from two different women that I have no idea if we're going to hear from. And when you were talking about sort of comparing to the Anita Hill situation, we know now, and we've known for quite some time, that there were other women that were prepared to testify in the Anita Hill hearings about similar allegations or similar conduct on behalf of Justice Thomas. And so we could repeat that mistake again and not hear from these other women, or not conduct some at least preliminary investigation into their allegations, or we can learn from the Anita Hill hearings and move forward with something more substantive with respect to those allegations as well.
And I think about this actually, there's so much that we've learned from those hearings. I don't think, at the Colorado legislature, obviously I don't know, for our viewing audience, I have to remember that we can get a little wonky here, and that, C-SPAN is sort of our ESPN, and that's probably not
I love
what,
C-SPAN.
I know,
right?
me too.
Right. Well, actually, this is how I figured out that I wanted to be involved in politics. Was during the government shutdown in 1995. I was sitting there watching the Newt Gingrich contract with America rallies and hearings, and thinking to myself, well, gee, this is a little dry, and I'm in high school, and I turned back to see whether my parents are still watching, and they've already dozed off. And I'm like,
you were
well,
wide awake.
and I'm still plugged in, so I'm going, well, maybe this is something I can keep doing then. So haven't stopped. But for the rest of us who maybe don't watch C-SPAN every day, I think Denise, from the ACLU perspective, actually all of us from each of our perspectives have sort of alluded to some of the questions that Judge Kavanaugh has faced during the hearings, and not all of us may have been watching C-SPAN to really understand what those were. And so are there some either landmark court decisions, we already talked a little bit about Roe, but are there other landmark court decisions that have been made that you're concerned about having overturned, or are there some court cases moving their way up through the process right now that you really want our viewers to understand what is really at stake right here? And so I'll start with Denise with ACLU, and then we'll just jump around. So
Sure, I think one of the big ones, and there are many significant ones, but we know that there are some cases that are challenging affirmative action practices in the education context. We know from the University of Michigan case, one that was decided or the deciding vote was Justice O'Connor, and then later reaffirmed in another case by Justice Kennedy. And that is a very narrow victory if we're supportive of affirmative action. There are some cases that are moving through the district and appellate courts, and so I think that's also a very worrisome area. I think marriage equality is another question. Again, I think the answer that Judge Kavanaugh gave to whether or not these are settled law, whether or not he thought these cases were decided correctly, he dodged, pivoted, much the same way that he did with Roe, as Jenna was talking about earlier. And so we really, really don't know what he will do as a judge. And it would have been obviously nice to have had a little bit more certainty. And I find it very interesting, for example, that everybody invokes the Ruth Bader Ginsburg rule. Well, she didn't answer these questions either. If you take a look at her hearing and her conversation about Roe v. Wade and women's access to abortion and reproductive health care, she could not have been more explicit, more definitive. She didn't pivot. She didn't hesitate. She didn't say, oh, that case might come before me, I can't answer it. She was decisive, she was clear, she was honest, and she was direct. So if that's the Ginsburg rule we want to invoke, I wish that we would adhere honestly to it.
I thought
100%.
they were referring to the Allen Ginsberg rule. He was sort of a deep poet, wasn't very clear on anything.
No,
it was Ruth Bader Ginsburg?
Yeah,
Okay.
it was Judge Ginsburg.
Okay,
yeah.
so-
Then Judge Ginsburg, now
Okay.
now the notorious RBG.
Well, all right. Well, that's good to hear. Well, one of the questions I'll ask of all of you is if there are either court cases or video clips from the hearings that you'd like to share, please put them up
I will.
on this page here in the comments section so people can take a look at that and use that for their own reference. So I'm going to jump over to Robert with AFL. Top 2, top 3 cases that you'd be concerned about what it means.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the cases that the court has decided so far, Citizens United, Janus versus AFSCME Council 31, both decided by the narrowest of margins and had a massive impact on the lives of people in the state and across the country. But the one I really want to bring up is when he was an appellate judge. It's the 40-year-old animal trainer at SeaWorld was killed, and against the decision of an administrative law judge and a panel of appellate judges, he wrote the dissent, and I wrote down a quote from that I feel is just shows how far from the needs of working people he is. He said, when should we as a society paternalistically decide that employees should be protected from the risk of significant personal physical injury? There's nearly 50 years of our as a country making sure that we do care about safety at the workplace, that we do care that people are protected from significant injury on the workplace. And when we see people who literally die on the job, and if Kavanaugh is the person who ends up being approved for the court, what is he going to decide on those cases that come up before him? And is that something that we as a society are okay with giving up? As working people, we are not going to stop. One judge, one politician, one court case isn't going to stop us. We're going to fight for safety on the job. We're going to fight for people to have a voice on the job. But this is the wrong person for it. And if that decision is just so wrong, when I know the people working right now as we speak, that have their lives at risk, but also have an expectation that everything has been done to make sure that those risks are minimized and that those risks are something that is thought of and taken care of. And I just can't believe that this is where we're going as a country, that we're gonna backslide to a place maybe 100 years ago when there was no expectation, when you went down in the mine and it was your responsibility to make sure you made it back up.
Well, I can't put a finer point on that.
Yeah.
So once again, for those of you who've been watching but don't read what's actually on Facebook right now, we're joined by Robert from AFL-CIO Colorado, Jenna from NARAL Colorado, and Denise from ACLU Colorado. So we've got the common thread of Colorado with an American flag behind us. And the question that I've asked you, what are top 2 or 3 court cases that are either coming through the process that we need to watch out for, or really things that we need to be on the lookout for, regardless of where these landmark court decisions are. So, Jenna, last but not least.
Well, I mean, Denise summed up a lot of what we were, some of what I've been concerned about, obviously, and of course, our main focus is, of course, going to be Roe and the absolute baseline of access to reproductive health care being legal. I mean, that's the first thing that we're most concerned about. I will say, though, in the past couple of years, there's already been some really, really bad precedents set with this court. The NIFLA v. Becerra decision that just came down within the last year was very, very concerning precedent to set. That was basically the Gorsuch court essentially decided that because fake clinics are not healthcare providers, that they are not then subject to the requirements of healthcare providers. So therefore they can pretend to be healthcare providers. It's wild. It's completely ridiculous, and it's not really logical. So I think that we're going to continue to see a lot of stuff like that. I think we see challenges that could pose threats to Roe constantly throughout the country, and it is really just a matter of time until something gets picked up.
And just to follow up a little bit on that, I think that certain constitutional lawyers have been, and it's something that the ACLU predicted would likely occur. We predicted this a few years ago, is that there would be more reliance on the First Amendment as a way to cut against certain other liberties. So, for example, in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, which is the baker who denied a cake to a gay couple, that was our clients were the ones that were denied the right to the cake, and we basically saw that as a pretty straight up source of discrimination in the commercial space that is protected under Colorado law. The supporters or the proponents of the baker, the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, took the position that no, it's really the First Amendment that's really at issue here. His religious liberty, his free speech is being imposed upon, and I think that that's been kind of a pretty clever legal angle that individuals that want to challenge protections that they don't like very much, like protections for LGBT individuals, LGBT couples. That's kind of the same thing in the NIFLA case. They're trying to take different angles in the First Amendment that we have not seen in the past.
Mm-hmm. And to add a little bit onto that as well, is, I mean, we see that in cases around contraceptive access as well. And the name of the case is, of course, escaping me at the moment. The Hobby Lobby case within the last couple of years, that essentially, I mean, religious discrimination is being allowed underneath the guise of the First Amendment in a lot of different cases and in a lot of different ways. And it's very, very concerning to see being set as precedent. And that's something else that obviously I would love to see Kavanaugh go into a little bit more throughout all of these conversations. But as Robert's pointed out, I mean, the issue here has really been transparency. We haven't seen it. So where does he stand on religious employers being able to deny access to certain healthcare services?
Well,
we don't know.
And in Janus, that was also another using the two-edged sword of free speech to cut against particular rights that were not appealing to the conservatives on the court.
Yep, and then using that into making a decision that really does upend, long-standing practice and something that was very important to having a voice on the job.
Right.
It really is.
Well, speaking of transparency, we're going to go to some questions here. So Jeremy says, I love Jenna, but because I don't see anyone on this panel. So Jeremy, you may just want to turn your phone from portrait to landscape. That may fix that. I can see the rest of us. I'm watching us on Facebook Live right now, which is completely not unsettling for me to be watching myself talk as I'm talking. Nick Anthony must be a trusted individual. He's got 2 first names. Asking, could there be a revisiting of Santa Clara versus Southern Pacific to end corporate personhood? So it's more of a could there as opposed to what can we be looking forward to, but I think we can dovetail off of that one as well. Is could there be a revisiting, and I guess what would that look like?
I suppose there could be. The Supreme Court can take any case that that's subject to either cert or petition. It could. I think that's a delicate area to delve into, but sure, certainly possible.
I think one of the things that I think a lot of folks are kind of forgetting when we're talking about Supreme Court nominations is that Judge Kavanaugh could sit on this court for another 45 years. And the thing is that when we talk about Supreme Court appointments being for life, we actually did a little bit of research and we found out that folks apparently don't really know what that means. Some people think that means for the lifetime of the president that appointed them, for the time of the administration, and that's not what it means. It means for the lifetime of the person being appointed until they choose to retire or until they pass, they will be on the court. Judge Kavanaugh, same as with Judge Gorsuch last year, both are relatively young men. And I think the thing to remember is that we are, when we talk about what cases could get brought up over the course of Kavanaugh being on this court, what cases have been brought up in the last 45 years? I mean, every topic under the sun has been brought up to this court in the last 45 years. And so if you want to think about it in those terms, really anything could come up. Kavanaugh could make decisions on virtually every single thing. I mean, who knows, 30 years from now, he could be setting the constitutional precedent for whether or not robots are allowed to play baseball in the major leagues or something. I don't know. What are we going to be talking about in 30 years? But he could be making this precedent for a very long time. And one of the statistics that we talk about with repro specifically is that if you think about it, 45 years is the entire age of a woman's, that is an entire reproductive lifetime for a woman. You could both enter puberty and exit menopause in the time that Kavanaugh could be on this court.
Well, I can't exit menopause, but
well, yeah.
but yes, no.
But,
your point is very well taken, and no, a lifetime appointment means the lifetime of the judge, and I really appreciate that actually. So, and in terms of robots playing baseball, I don't know if
I support it. I don't care.
AFL, do you guys represent the Major League Players Union, or is that someone else?
We do have the Broncos.
Okay,
the Broncos here.
Okay, so that's a different story for
just more in general with that question. I see it as, is this court going to stand up to corporate power and to some of the abuses of it? And the answer is no. If you look at the way the court has been deciding them in the recent past, it has been to protect the privileged and the powerful. And if you look at what adding Brett Kavanaugh to that court would do, it would just reinforce that and make that more what happens. I mean, that's the most basic thing. If people are trying to think of a way that we can make sure that working people have as much rights as corporations, this is not a good decision and not a good nominee.
Okay, another wild card question from Nick Anthony here. When the Democrats win in November, wow, that's a prediction. Would they be able to expand the Supreme Court up to 13 before 2020, or would they need to wait due to presidential obstruction? Interesting question. I know that the last time that we probably considered this was more than 45 years ago with FDR, who threatened to appoint more folks to the Supreme Court than currently were there. Any thoughts on that wild card question?
Well, no, it's certainly it is certainly an option. I think the question would be whether there would be enough votes to override a veto, but that is certainly something that any party could do in either chamber. They could do it now, and the Democrats could certainly do it if they took control of the Senate. It actually can initiate in either chamber. It doesn't necessarily have to be out of the Senate, but it is something within the purview of the legislature to do. And the question is, I'm going to guess, right, that this particular president would not sign such a bill, and so they would have to override a veto. But it's certainly within the power of the legislature to do.
Gotcha. So potentially it could happen tomorrow.
It can happen anytime. Yes.
Not to draw a worst case scenario. So,
yes.
So, well, let's jump to. I want to do a couple other questions, and then actually, I think maybe the last thing I really want to end on here is, what is it that we can do as individuals and Coloradans to participate in this process, to talk to the folks that will actually be voting on Judge Kavanaugh. So this is what I'm wondering. Worst case scenario, which is not robots playing baseball, but I'm fascinated by that one now. Worst case scenario happens. We have not just a Kavanaugh appointment, but some of the court cases that we've been talking about in terms of protecting civil liberties, protecting women's health, protecting labor are overturned or made worse. As Coloradans, what can we do at the Colorado State Legislature to maybe insulate ourselves from some of those things? So I'm thinking, if marriage equality is back on the table and it gets overturned, what can we do? If Roe is overturned, what's already in place, or what can we do? And we'll sort of, whoever wants to jump in first can go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just in general, speaking for the Colorado AFL-CIO and for the working people in Colorado is, we're not going to let the rich and powerful decide the American story, and whether we cannot get the sort of satisfaction we need and the representation we need at the national level, of course we're going to have to focus on the state level and make sure that those rights are protected. A voice on the job, safety on the job. This is something that we already have in Colorado. We have some expanded rights, so I want to make sure that we look at any opportunity to make sure that we're paving our own way and making sure that in the halls of power we have people like Jonathan Singer who can speak truth to power and can be that voice for working people. So absolutely, as court cases come down, we're going to be trying to strategize on ways to make sure those protections are enshrined at any level, whether that is in the state house or lower. I mean, we need to make sure that working people have a voice on the job.
Yep. Okay. Agreed. I don't know, Jenna, any other thoughts on that? Are there things currently in state law that would protect us against overturning of Roe, or are there other things that we need to put in place to actually make sure that we're protecting Coloradans if Roe is in fact overturned?
Mm-hmm. So to explain that, I need to explain a little bit about what's going to happen with the states surrounding us. So if Roe is overturned, and obviously there's the chance that it could be gutted entirely to the point where it's completely ineffective, or it could be straight up overturned. And so depending on either way that goes, Colorado actually exists in this kind of, we are safe, but I never like relying on the idea that we're safe, because we're not really. Depending on how anything goes, how any election goes, without constitutional protection, state laws can be passed across the country. And that's where we see with a lot of the states that surround us have what is referred to as a trigger ban. And essentially that abortion is legal in their state because of Roe, but if Roe goes away, they have state laws that trigger into effect that outlaw it in their state. Colorado does not have a trigger law, but we also don't have any law in the state that specifically protects abortion either, and that specifically protects doctors. Now, we do have some precedent in the state. Obviously, our doctors are operating now, which is great. So we have that type of precedent there. But unfortunately, we also have some anti-choice precedent in our state as well, including a 1984 state public funding ban, which bars low-income women from being able to access services. It's incredibly discriminatory, and it's in our Constitution. We have a parental notification requirement that harms young women's access to safe and legal care. And so we everything for our state, and frankly for our entire region, really depends on what happens in the next few months. If we are able to, if Roe goes away as of tomorrow, we are okay. Our doctors will continue to be able to practice. They will continue to be able to see patients. If we lose, we could see our state become one of those states that has trigger bans. We could see our state become one of those places that would
So when you
make
say
it illegal.
if we lose, so if Democrats or pro-choice candidates were to lose control of either the House, the Senate, or the House, the Senate, and the governor's office, if we didn't have people that supported pro-choice issues, that's where we need to be on guard, especially if a Roe v. Wade decision actually happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of different things that can be done at the state level. At city levels. There's a lot that can be done here, and I think that while it is nice to know that if it goes away tomorrow, our doctors will be okay. If things go incredibly poorly, we could see a lot, and we do see these attacks. These attacks come every year. There were 4 anti-choice bills in the legislature this year. There was one that even almost accidentally just passed personhood because people didn't realize that was the language that was in it, which would have, of course, outlawed abortion. So we are always on guard for looking at these. And something for the folks watching at home to realize is that when these anti-choice bills are brought up in the state legislature, they're often killed with only 1 vote in committee. These are not things that are beaten down immediately and never come back. They come up every single year. So it has never been more important to make sure that you're actually getting out there and supporting pro-choice people because there's a lot that can be done legislatively to protect women.
Sure, or killed by 1 vote, not with 1 vote. So it doesn't take 1 vote to kill something, but these are on 7-6 margins, 4-3 margins. This is,
yes.
So.
I get wonky, so yes, thank you.
So, yeah, and with,
they just cut along party lines, every time, which is really unfortunate that some of the more outrageous anti-abortion, anti-reproductive health care access bills are actually defeated on a party line basis.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe the short answer to what can we do is make sure we elect the right candidates. We won't say who to vote for or vote against specifically here right now, but we can say that people really need to, with the Kavanaugh appointment potentially happening any minute now, we need to make sure that we can do the right thing at the state level.
Right, and I want to maybe, much like what I said at the beginning, at the introduction level, is making Colorado a civil liberties safe zone is something that we have very much the power to do. And frankly, it's not just the Kavanaugh appointment. There are a lot of things that are happening by executive order and by executive power and other legislative efforts that are not even going through the courts that Colorado can do something about. For example, Colorado can do more to protect the undocumented individuals in our state. We can do more for wages, for equal pay, for equal, we can do a lot for to make sure that we do have access to reproductive health care. One of the things that the ACLU constantly talks about is Colorado. There are many women in the state of Colorado that are already living in a post-Roe world, even though they have the choice to have an abortion, but they don't have access to it. So there is a lot that the legislature and the governor can do to just increase access. Now, I think if Roe v. Wade is overturned, and there are other states, neighboring states like New Mexico, for example, they do have a trigger law, then we will have to provide not only more access to the women in our state, but to women in neighboring states. And that's no easy lift, but I think that is something that the NARALs, the Planned Parenthoods, the Quolods, the ACLU is very mindful of our job and our obligation in that regard.
And annexing Nebraska is off the table right now?
I gather that it is.
Okay. Well, that's all right. We don't want to go to 49 states. We like our 50 states. Maybe
nice round number.
Maybe 51 or 52 later. So,
yeah.
With about 10 minutes left here, what I want to jump to, and then we'll see if there's any questions remaining, is, we've heard very loud and clear here. This is, from a perspective of labor, from a perspective of civil liberties, perspective of women's health, and really healthcare in general. It's not really just women's health. This was a bad nomination. It would be a bad appointment. We talked about what we can do as a state to maybe insulate ourselves if a worst case scenario does happen, but let's maybe not go there. So what are some of the asks that you would have of not just the viewing audience, but people of Colorado in general, in terms of how we can influence this outcome to make sure that we don't get a Judge Kavanaugh becoming a Justice Kavanaugh?
I'll just start because I do want to underscore the fact that the ACLU does not take a position on judicial appointments. So we basically are simply asking our elected officials as well as constituents to listen very closely and to participate. I think we have one senator from Colorado asking for an FBI investigation. We have another senator that's been quiet on that issue, and so constituents need to do whatever they need to do to have their voice heard, and we encourage that, and we encourage an honest and open and transparent and fair hearing tomorrow, and we'll be listening closely.
All right, let's keep going from my left to my right.
Well, we certainly do take positions, and we think the man needs to withdraw. But we are, I would definitely say one of the things that I think that our opposition really has on us is that they are relentless, and a lot of the times you tell people, I need you to call your senators, and they go, well, yeah, but I already did that. Did you call them today? Calling them every single day and reminding them of where you stand on this actually really does make a difference. I mean, I'm sure Rep. Singer can share, but if his office is receiving a call every single day, they're going to notice that, and they're going to actually take that into account. And that really is how these legislative offices operate. So if you call every single day and the other person is calling once, it really seems like you had a ton more calls into that office. So make sure that you're calling every single day. Put that pressure on Cory Gardner. And frankly, continue. I mean, Senator Bennett has said that he is going to vote against this nomination. He has called for an FBI investigation. But also, don't let him off the hook either. Keep pushing him to be louder, to be more vocal. I mean, he is saying the right things, but he can be using his position a little bit more to maybe even be pushing Senator Gardner into trying to move his position as well. So continue to contact your senators, help people in your local communities like Rep. Singer, and just, keep paying attention. Watch tomorrow.
So let me get a little more specific than when you say call. I've got everybody on speed dial, and they know that, which is why they block my number now. but in all seriousness, how do people look up Senator Bennett's office, Senator Gardner's office, or if you're in another state watching this, how do you figure out who to call and what their number is? Is there an easy website that everyone can go to that will get people their lawmakers' contact info?
Well, you can go to prochoicecolorado.org and be connected. There is a thing directly on our homepage that will actually get you the contact information for both of our U.S. senators. You can also just go to their individual websites as well. Many of them will post their D.C. offices, their Denver offices, especially if they're a U.S. senator. They've probably got some offices in your local area. If you live in Grand Junction and there's an office there, call that one and call D.C. Call both of them. So you can find it on our website, prochoicecolorado.org, or you can find the expanded just simply on their own.
Gotcha. And when you say call, so there are times that I'll get phone calls in my office and people will say, well, I want you to vote no on this, but they may not have a good reason why. Is there one solid good reason? Is that I'm not asking you to give people a script here, but is there an easy way to do this? Because it's kind of daunting to call your first time anywhere, really. Is there an easy way that you can say, what do those lawmakers need to hear?
Mm-hmm.
Probably name, first and last name, what city they're from,
mm-hmm.
So they know whether or not it's a constituent.
Mm-hmm.
But what's sort of the one line response to give to people so that everyone's loud and clear on what exactly they're asking their elected official to do?
So I mean, obviously it's going to depend on who you're calling, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're calling Senator Bennett, I think thanking him for saying that he will be voting against Kavanaugh and for the work that he has been doing, in addition to asking him to be pushing Senator Gardner to vote no as well. And I think when calling Senator Gardner, to definitely tell his office of frankly, the most impactful thing and the best conversation a constituent can have is one that is genuine. What is the reason that you're calling? I mean, I of course, I would say I call them every single day to tell them that I'm nervous about the standards of Roe and that I want to protect Roe v. Wade, and that because of that I am nervous about the Kavanaugh nomination, and that I am concerned about how he treats women and that women deserve better. And that's kind of what I say when I call, because that's what means something the most to me. But I think that depending, if you're motivated to call because of workers' rights, tell them that. Tell them what you're concerned about there. What they want to hear is something genuine. They don't want to hear a script necessarily. They want to hear from you and what you think and what you care about.
Yeah, and from our perspective
Robert.
with labor, I want to echo the idea that you need to call both to Washington, D.C. and to your local office. These senators do have offices in remote places or in parts of the state like Pueblo and other areas, and it's important for us to be known with those staffers so that they're pushing our issues up to the senators. And then we keep it fairly simple with the calls we've been having our members make on this, and that's working people expect the Supreme Court to be fair and transparent, and that Brett Kavanaugh is not the nominee for that. And that's, I think, hitting on what you said too, the real reason that they are calling. You know, safety on the job is something he has shown to not be a key issue for him. And so what has happened in your own workplace or in your own life that you want to share and when those rights need to be protected. So that's what I would suggest. Also though, definitely call the closest one to you and the one in DC.
Okay, so both the district office and the DC office are
Yes.
good. So,
And frankly, we've had locals down in the Pueblo area that do make those calls to the local office, and so they are very well known, and it makes it very clear the position that working people are taking, and it's been something that helps, I think, make it more powerful.
yeah.
And I would also just say maybe this comes from my field organizing background, but the thing is that people, if you're ever nervous that you're going to call somebody and because you're on the opposing ends of them that they're going to be mean or rude to you or something, they're paid to be nice. They're paid to that's their job is to interact with the public on behalf of their representative in the office that they're working in. So they may be short and they may not want to have a very long conversation with you anyway, but don't worry about people being mean to you. That's not a thing. So.
Well, that's a relief. Yeah, no, I mean, people don't get elected to office by being jerks all the time. It may seem that way, but on a one-to-one level,
Maybe
most
jerks
people,
to certain people all the time,
right,
but not
right,
to everybody.
Right. No, I learned that lesson pretty quickly. So we've only got about a couple minutes left, and there's what I'm going to ask folks to do is. If our panelists would like to respond to some of the questions that have been put in the comments section, please don't hesitate to post on those later on. But we'll just close by saying if there's one thing, I'll say the one thing we didn't talk about today that I wish we had time to talk about is what this means for the environmental movement and what this means for climate change, and we really didn't talk about that very much today, but that's where I would like to go next, and hopefully have that conversation. But any closing thoughts? Denise,
on
anything. Denise, ACLU.
No, the ACLU perspective is, even though we don't take positions on judicial appointments, we know very well from analyzing his judicial history, Judge Kavanaugh's, that this appointment will take the court in a conservative direction. And we need to be thinking not only about areas like Roe v. Wade, affirmative action, marriage equality, etc., but we also need to worry very much about the notion of executive power, because I think there is undoubtedly an issue looming that will and I say may, but I think very likely will get to the Supreme Court.
Okay, and Jenna?
Yeah, I completely agree with Denise. I mean, obviously I'm incredibly concerned about Kavanaugh's treatment of women just in general. I mean, a man who had been to so many parties with the cultures that have been described that he can't even remember specific ones is very concerning. And obviously women's reproductive health care is in terrible jeopardy. But I do think that just in general, that presidential power aspect, Judge Kavanaugh has said, I mean, I'll put it in layman's terms, but that he essentially believes the president is above the law. And that is absolutely horrifying, and no one is above the law. That is the opposite point of that's the opposite point of the entire country that we are sitting in, is that no one is supposed to be above the law, and I am just so glad that there's people like you who are actually helping educate folks on what can happen with this nomination. So thanks for having us.
Thank you. Yeah, it didn't work for Nixon. Hopefully it won't work for other elected officials.
I mean,
labor,
that
so
control
AFL.
of executive power is important. The Senate should reject this nomination and demand a nominee that will protect the rights of working people and uphold basic constitutional values of life, liberty, equality, and justice for all. But at the end of the day, you know, working people aren't sitting on their hands. They are organizing at unprecedented levels. We feel it out there, and you know, they're not going to stand for any politician that supports justices that put their rights at risk and their children and their children's rights at risk. So I would say that's would be my closing, is just that people are going to make change whether they have support in the halls of power or not at this moment.
Well, I want to thank all three of our panelists.
Thank you,
You
Representative.
guys did a great job. Thank you for taking your time. Speaking of working people, thanks to our visiting or visual audience here for participating during your lunch break. Tell your boss if you're a couple minutes late what you were doing, unless they don't like what you were doing, and then
Don't tell 'em.
it'll be our secret. No, we had a really good, solid group of people watching almost the entire time. So thank you for taking this time. We'll leave this post up, and like I said, we'll be responding to your questions in the comments section as the day goes on. And everyone, keep your eyes open tomorrow. Thanks again.
Thanks.
Thank you.